Hi friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. If you've never seen me before, my name is Kirsty and I like to talk about true crime every single Sunday, so I would love to see you there next week. I see every single new subscriber. I love you, I appreciate you, and I thank you. I'm just going to get straight into this one today because it is basically the plot of the most intense psychological crime thriller. It's actually just real life. This case has always absolutely blown my mind and I just need to talk about it because I just cannot comprehend how one person can physically go through what this woman went through. Alison Botha was born on the 22nd of September in 1967 in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. She was academic growing up and after finishing school she worked overseas for a few years before going back home and starting work as an insurance broker. On the 18th of December 1994, Alison was 27 years old at this point and she and some of her friends went to the beach for the day just to hang out. They were just having a nice time as they usually would and they all decided to go back to Alison's house afterwards to have some pizza and just play board games and just do what they normally would. One of Alison's friends that was there that night didn't drive, so she asked Alison if she'd be able to give her a lift home. Obviously Alison said yes, that was no problem, so they jump in Alison's car and she drives her home. Alison then gets back to her apartment building and she goes to find a parking space to go to, and she automatically just goes to the same one that she'd just left not that long before, but it had been taken. She was a little bit annoyed because it was late at this point. It was like 1 a.m, so the middle of the night, and she was a bit frustrated that she had to find a new space, but there was nothing she could do. She just drove around for a little bit just to see if she could find a new one, and she did manage to find one, but it was further away than she would have liked. It was also on the street rather than in a car park, and the lighting was quite bad because it was underneath a tree, so already it was dark, but being underneath a tree made it even darker and it just kind of shielded her car from any additional light. But she didn't really have a choice, so she parks there. Once she's pulled up, she reaches into the passenger side because she's got a bag of washing, like a bag of laundry, that she wants to take inside with her. So she grabs it and goes to, pick it up to take it. But as she's facing that way, she feels like a gust of warm air behind her, which is weird because she's on her own and it felt unnatural in that moment. So she instinctively turned around really quickly and she sees her car door flung wide open and there is a man standing there. It's a tall man, he's quite slim built, he's got blonde hair and she can see that he is holding a knife in one of his hands. He tells Alison to move over into the passenger seat or he's going to kill her, and I can only imagine that in that moment she just had a complete sense of dread and she didn't really know what else to do, so she just agreed and she slid over and he got into the driver's side. He told Alison that he didn't want to hurt her, he just needed to borrow her car for about an hour, so she agrees to it because at this point she doesn't really have any choice. She's trapped in the car with this man. She doesn't really know what to do, so she agrees to it and they start driving. As they're driving, he says that he needs to go and pick up one of his friends, and it's like a situation just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. She's already been threatened. She's in the car with a man she's never met before. He's got a weapon and now he's going to add in another strange man who she has no idea who it is, and they're just going to be driving around in her car while she's trapped. It just gets worse for Alison. As they're driving, he starts to make a little bit of conversation and he introduces himself as Clint and asks what her name is, and she lies and she says that she's called Susan. She also tries to scare him a little bit and say that her boyfriend is at home waiting for her, and obviously she hasn't arrived yet. He's going to worry, he's likely going to call the police, but I think she's hoping deep down that this man's going to panic and think, oh my god, I better just drop her off now because the police are going to come after us. But unfortunately, he didn't fall for this trick, but it was a good tactic. Instead, though, they get to this friend's location and they pick him up and he gets in the back of the car. Alison said that she made eye contact with him through the mirror and she said that his eyes literally looked black. She could tell he was just not a good person. It was like the devil sat in the back seat looking back at her. So they continue driving and they're getting further and further away to an area that's quite secluded and not a part of the town that you want to go to. It's kind of where nothing good happens in that kind of area. You kind of stay away from it. It's just not like the nicest part of town. That is where they end up driving towards. They pull up and they start to get out of the car and they instruct Alison to get out of the car as well. They then ask her if she's going to fight, and Alison replies no. She is outside of a car now in the dark with two strange men. She knows at least one of them has a weapon. She has no idea about the other one, but he looks like the devil with black eyes. She just doesn't think she can fight. She's got nothing to give. She just says no and knows that from this moment on, she is in for absolute hell. As you can imagine, what happens to Alison from this point is just the most inhumane attack possible. She is sexually assaulted multiple times, beaten. It's just unimaginable that somebody could do this to another person. Alison completely disassociated throughout the entire thing. She just tried to not focus on what was happening to her. She tried to just be out of her own body just so that she could survive it. When this relentless attack comes to an end, Clint and his friend start having a conversation between each other about what they should do with Alison now, and they decide between themselves that the best thing to do is to kill her. So without much warning or without much thought, they grab the knife and they plunge it into Alison's stomach 35 times. 35 separate stab wounds, all concentrated on Alison's stomach. And Clint and his friend think, brilliant, we've done a good job there. She's dead. We can call it a day. We can get back in her car and we can go. But it's as they're talking about this and congratulating themselves on this job well done, they see Alison's leg twitch. They look at each other and they're like, "Oh my god, she's still alive. We haven't finished the job. What else can we do?" So they take the knife and they slash Alison's neck 16 times, just backwards and forwards across her neck 16 times, to the point where she was almost decapitated. Alison remembers this moment, and she remembers being in and out of consciousness, looking up and just seeing the darkness of the sky and one of the men's arms just going backwards and forwards across her face, and she didn't know what was going on. She couldn't make out really what was happening other than seeing that. And obviously each time she saw the arm go backwards and forwards, it was because they were slashing her throat when they were doing it. The whole time that this is happening, the whole time Alison's neck is literally being sliced by a knife. She's in and out of moments of consciousness, and she hears bits and pieces of conversation that these two men are having with each other, and she hears them talking to each other but using different names than the ones they'd told her that they were called. The friend that got picked up and was sat in the back of the car during the car drive, he was calling Clint, the driver, Franz, and Franz was calling the other man Tians. So Alison clocks this piece of information and she remembers that this is crucial. They lied about their names and now she knows their real names. Obviously, they didn't realise that she was still alive during some of these moments. They didn't think that she would be listening to any of this. So they were just freely chatting and she was remembering it all. Alison hears the two of them deciding that she's probably likely dead at this point. She even hears one of them say there's nobody that could survive an attack like that. She's definitely dead. So they go to get back in Alison's car. They throw her clothes out because that's where they'd put them. They just dump the clothes next to her body, leave her for dead in the middle of nowhere, and they drive off. So a little bit of backstory about these two wonderful human beings. Franz is a 26-year-old man. He had an alright upbringing, normal family life. He went into the army after school, and somewhere along the way he began believing in Satanism. He had a girlfriend who thought that she was a witch, and Satan just influenced him a lot throughout his life. Tians was younger. He was 19 years old. He also went into the army, and coincidentally he also started believing in Satanism as well. It was after they'd both dropped out of the army that they met, and they quickly became friends, and it was inevitable since they had the exact same unusual interests, and then it wouldn't be that long until they started a life of crime together. In fact, at the time that they hijacked Alison's car, they were actually both on bail for rape. Going back to Alison, she is laid in the middle of nowhere, bleeding out. She is just waiting to pass away. She knows there's no surviving this. Nobody would survive an attack like that. The men were right. She was done for, and she was just essentially laying and waiting. But she knew that before she did pass away, she wanted to pass on the information of who these two men were, because she knew that with how violent that attack was, that wasn't the first time they'd done something that bad, and it wasn't going to be the last time. They were going to go on and they were going to do that to somebody else because of how easy it seemed and how unbothered they were. So she got the strength to write their names in the sand. She wrote Fran's and Tian's, and then next to that she also wrote I heart mum, just so that her mum would know, she was thinking about her and that she loved her mum, as a last message before she passed away. So in that moment she's laid there thinking, okay, I've said who's done this, they'll get caught, they'll hopefully get justice, and at least I might stop someone else from having to go through something like this. And then she waits to die. She waits to succumb to her injuries. She's just laid there, and she's laid there for a little bit longer. And then she's just still alive, and she starts to think to herself, hang on a minute, I've been laid here for a while. I'm still alive. I wonder if there's a way that I could actually get up and try and make myself the way over to the road, because she could see car headlights and she could hear cars. She wasn't too far away, and she started to think, I might actually be able to do it. She manages to drag herself up onto her hands and her knees, and that in itself is absolutely amazing after what she'd been through. But the second that she gets up into that position, she can feel that something is not right at all. And she reaches down because she can just feel, she just knew something was really seriously wrong. And the second she put her hands towards her stomach, she could feel her own intestines, and they were just hanging out of her stomach. She was literally going to have to keep herself together if she was going to get through this. I mean, she'd been stabbed 35 times in the stomach. I think it's easy to forget, like, that number of times. Obviously, her entire stomach will have just been a complete open wound at this point. Like, there's no wonder that her organs were hanging out of her body. There was probably barely anything keeping it together. And because of the fact that it was actually a full moon that night, it meant that she could see a tiny bit of what she was doing. So she grabbed the shirt that she'd been wearing that night that the men had thrown next to her, and she ties it around her stomach to hold her own intestines in. And she uses her hand as well to kind of press it all together just to make sure that she's in and secure. And then she manages to get up to her feet. But the second she gets to her feet, everything just goes black, and she's panicking. She's thinking, oh my God, something is going on with my eyes. I can't see anything. What is happening? And so she goes to reach up to her face just to see, like, is it blood? What's going on with her face? What's going on with her eyes? And when she goes to touch them, there's just nothing there. Her entire head is not where she was expecting it to be. And it's because obviously she'd almost been decapitated, but she didn't really know that. So as she stood up, her head just completely flopped backwards. And so she was just looking back at nothing, like the sky, like just black. And so she had to use her other hand to flip her head back up and hold her head on and in place, while her other hand held her stomach in. She was quite literally holding herself together. She somehow, like this, manages to stumble across to the main road, and she collapses when she gets there. She just waits for cars to come past, and luckily it's not too long before they do. It's not too much of a quiet road. The first car that goes past just drives straight past, and I don't even know if they saw her there or whether they saw somebody that looked worse for wear and they just thought they're not getting involved. I'm not sure. But luckily, the next person who stopped in their car was actually a student vet named Tian, not to be confused with Tian's, the perpetrator in this case. Tian is actually an incredible person. He was a student vet who was on holiday in the area, not usually from there, just happened to be driving past that night, and he saw Alison, and he gets out and he starts doing everything that he's been trained to do as a student vet, but he's just doing it on Alison to try and keep her alive. He rings the ambulance and it says it should be there within about 15 minutes, but it takes an hour and a half. So he spends an hour and a half at the side of the road with Alison, talking to her constantly, trying to keep her alive, doing everything he could. And she was doing the same thing. She was trying to stay alive and trying to make conversation, and they were both just working so hard, putting in the effort to stay alive. And I can only imagine in that moment they were both just completely panicked. I'm sure Tian thought it was going to be a real difficult task trying to keep her alive just because of her injuries, but they managed to, and the ambulance did arrive all that time later, and she was taken to hospital. When they get to the hospital, there are so many little miracles in this case. The first one being like there was a full moon so she could kind of see what she was doing. And the second one being that Tian was a student vet who could kind of keep her alive, knowing a bit of training of medical stuff. And the third one is that when she gets to the hospital, the on-call doctor for that night is actually a throat surgery specialist. On the night that a woman comes in with her throat slashed so many times, her head was almost taken off. That's who is on call as a doctor that night. It's absolutely incredible. Alison is rushed into surgery and she manages to survive. The very next day, Franz and Tians are arrested and their picture is shown to Alison just so that she can confirm that these were the two men that committed this attack on her. And she was able to kind of signal that it was. Obviously, she couldn't speak or nod or do anything like that because, you know, she'd almost had her head taken off. But she was able to identify that this was these two men. But the police wanted to have a really, really cut and dry, black and white case. And so they said to her, you're going to need to physically say, yes, these are the men that did this. We can't really take like a written like acknowledgement of this or like a thumbs up. We have to get you to say physically in spoken word that these are the two men. And the hospital staff, I think, look at the police as though they have lost their freaking minds because of the state of Alison. How do they expect this woman to make a conversation with them, to tell them what has just happened when she almost had, I don't think it, like, I can only say it so many times, she almost had her head taken off. It just doesn't make any sense. But Alison is probably the strongest woman I've ever read about, ever. And she says to the hospital staff, do what you need to do, unplug any medical device that is currently keeping me going right now, just for long enough for me to say, yes, it's these two men that did this. And then you can, you know, re-hook me back up and I will just continue with my recovery and that'll be fine. And that is exactly what happened. So she confirms in words that Franz and Tians are the two men that were responsible. The two men were sent to trial and Franz claimed that he was possessed by Satan and the devil made him do it, and that he spent so many years listening to heavy metal music, all of the subliminal messaging got into his brain, and so he wasn't really thinking right. It wasn't really him. It was all kind of stemming from that bad music that he'd been listening to all those years, and it made him do it. Both men were then given life sentences without the possibility of parole. Alison was able to go on and have a full recovery, which is absolutely amazing, but there were things that she was told she wouldn't be able to do just because of the severity of her injuries. Like, she was told that she wouldn't be able to get pregnant and go on to give birth to a child. However, she proved science wrong and she actually went on to have 2 children of her own. And Tian, who was the student vet that helped save Alison's life that night, he was so inspired by what had happened and by Alison's bravery and just what they'd been through together that he changed what he'd been studying. He decided that he didn't want to be a student vet anymore and he actually wanted to be with humans, and so he started studying gynecology and he went on to deliver Alison's second baby, which I just think is like a real full circle moment. I think if anybody went back in time to when they were both at the side of that road and they said in however many years' time, you're not going to be trying to save her life, you're going to be delivering her second baby, I think they both would have just laughed and said, there is absolutely no way that is happening. But it just shows how resilient they were in that moment. Alison would go on and do a lot of tours around the country telling her story and everything that happened to her that night, and she also went on to write a book about it as well. But Franz from prison heard about this book and the tour and the success that Alison was having going round and telling everybody about what happened, and he said, actually, she wouldn't be having all of this success if it wasn't for me. Like, I'm the reason for her success, so I should get a little bit of that wonga, which I just think is absolutely disgusting. But I actually don't know whether or not he ended up going on to get money, but I know that he kicked up a fuss because he did want some of that. And in case that isn't infuriating enough that this man wanted some of Alison's money, they both went on to actually get released early. They were both released in 2023, but thankfully the decision to cancel parole was made. It was decided and said that in instances where acts of violence against women and children were committed, it's imperative to protect and secure the community, which makes a lot of sense. It was a severely violent attack. Men that commit those kinds of attacks, anybody that commits those kinds of attacks should not be released. The community is not safe from people like that. So both Franz and Tiens were reincarcerated and they will remain in custody for the foreseeable future, thank goodness. Every time I think about this case, it just makes me think that it could well and truly be the plot of a film, and you wouldn't think it would be possible to be a true story, because it just seems so unbelievable, but it is just true. It absolutely blows my mind that Alison was able to survive that. I still cannot wrap my head around how she did it. She is absolutely incredible. She's on social media as well. She's just, I don't know, she is like no one else. If you've got any case suggestions of anything that you would like me to cover specifically, I would love to know. If you let me know in the comments, that would be absolutely perfect. And I will see you again next Sunday for another video. Bye!